The Beyond the Fame podcast is fed by Lido Pizza. Lido Pizza never cuts corners. For menu and locations, visit LidoPizza.com. And of course, this podcast would not be possible without our longtime title sponsor, the Hollywood Casino at Charlestown Races in West Virginia. Upcoming featured entertainment includes Night Ranger on May 16th and Ashley McBride on May 17th. Details and tickets at HollywoodCasinoCharlestown.com. Must be 21 to enter the casino floor and attend a show. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Welcome to the newest episode of Beyond the Fame with Jason Fraley. I'm your host, Jason Fraley, picking the brains of the top filmmakers, musicians, and artists of our time. Get ready for a new Shakespeare adaptation as the indie musical Juliet and Romeo hits movie theaters this Friday, starring Jason Isaacs as Lord Montague and Rebel Wilson as Lady Capulet, while introducing Clara Ruggard and Jamie Ward as the tragic star-crossed lovers. I spoke with writer-director Timothy Scott Bogart about creating the musical with his Grammy-winning songwriter brother Evan Kidd Bogart, who discovered Eminem and penned Beyoncé's Halo. We also discussed memories of growing up with record exec father Neil Bogart, founder of Casablanca Records. Hey, Timothy Scott Bogart. Hey, thank you so much for joining the show today.
It's a great pleasure to be here.
We are talking because you are the writer and director of the new film, the new musical, indie musical, Juliet and Romeo, in movie theaters nationwide Friday, May 9th. Now, obviously, everybody knows Romeo and Juliet, obviously based on the iconic Shakespeare tragic play. You know, you, as I said, writer and director, so you adapted the Shakespeare play yourself. So how did you set out to make this unique, and what about it said, you know what, it's time for another retelling of this, baby?
Well, you know, I think the interesting question about is it time for another retelling? There's literally a retelling every day in every city, in every country around the world. So it's not just me, in fairness, but it really does go back to when I was a much younger person. I used to direct on the stage and directed Romeo and Juliet on the stage a number of times and always felt I failed. and I felt I failed ultimately because I thought there was so much more story to tell between these young people and their parents and their world that the play itself just didn't allow for. And I always would walk away going, gosh, I think there's more, and just kept lingering and lingering and lingering. I remember seeing Stoppard's Shakespeare in Love. I was like, well, that's a brilliant way to approach that idea and those incredible themes.
Right.
But so I kept kind of coming back to it. But it really was the origin of this was about 10 years ago. And I was with my brother, Evan Bogart, who wrote all the songs with his partner, Justin Gray. And I remember asking him about iambic pentameter specifically and saying, why do you think William Shakespeare used it? Because, you know, in fairness, it's tough, iambic pentameter, right? It's hard for audiences to react. And it was a great answer. He said, effortlessly, he said, you know, because it was the poetry of his time.
Right.
I said, well, it's interesting. What's the poetry of our time? He said, pop music. Now, my brother, Evan, wrote Halo for Beyonce and
SOS. No, not just wrote it, won a Grammy for it, right?
By the way, and won a Grammy. So in fairness, right, like, of course he was going to go to pop, but I drilled deeper. Well, why though do you think pop music has such incredible resonance? And it was an effortless comedy. So just watch young people listen to this music. It's not that they're listening to it. Mm-hmm. It is literally the music flowing through them. It's why their headphones never come off their heads. It's why the music's playing constantly. Music speaks to people in a way that, frankly, their parents don't, their teachers don't, their friends don't. Yeah. It's something about their internal self. And I was, well, that is what Shakespeare was trying to get always with all of these kind of inner monologues. And those two ideas, this idea of music as the true inner voice, for today's audience, seemed like a fabulously cool way to bring those themes, which have not left us for hundreds of years, but to a maybe more immediate moment for these audiences.
Absolutely. Well said. Well said. And I would love to get a deeper dive into some of the songs in a second. But first, at the top, I wanted to ask about. I know there was a couple title changes along the way, right?
Yes.
You shot actually in Italy, right? And it was originally called Verona.
100%. Yeah.
Verona was the original title, and then it was going to be Verona's Romeo and Juliet, and now it's Juliet and Romeo. If you don't want to go into all the backstory, that's okay. But just in general, why did it change so many times, and then finally the flip of Juliet and Romeo, flipping the order? Why did we settle on that?
It's actually a really straightforward and easy answer, I think. I started out saying it was Verona, and that's correct, because I felt there was more story than just the Romeo and Juliet. But in candor, as we started talking about how to message what we were doing to people, so they had a reason to show up, Verona was a little vague. And so that's kind of led me going, okay, well, maybe it's Verona's Romeo and Juliet. The idea that people could understand, guys, this is, first of all, Romeo and Juliet is arguably the most well-known story and characters in the history of literature, maybe with the exception of the Bible. I mean, it's
Hands
really
down.
that well.
Hands down.
So knowing that, I needed the ability to tell audience, guys, it is what you think you know.
Right.
It's just not what you actually know. So I kept going, well, so then you just call it Romeo and Juliet? Well, that says it is what you think you know, but it doesn't say that's what you actually know. And I was literally playing with the title in post-production, and I had the file on my computer, and I don't even know why. I just somehow flipped the characters and thought, well, that's interesting. What if I just started it on screen going Romeo and Juliet and then switch them? At the very least, it tells an audience, I don't know why they did that, but clearly I'm in for something. And I wanted audiences to feel they're in for something new with something that is so tried and true.
That's actually really a genius way, because by flipping it's literally telling us it's what you know, but flipped. So there you go.
Something different, figure it out. And so that was the hope there. Yeah.
I love it. Well, take us into the casting now, because so many people have played it over the years. So for Juliet, it's a Danish actress named Clara Rugaard. Is that right? And then Romeo is an Australian actor named Jamie Ward. Sing their praises. If we haven't heard about them, you're gonna soon, right?
boy, you are. These two young actors are just extraordinary. The casting process, I always felt from the jump, was going to be two very different ones. I felt that the parental characters and the governmental characters and the preacher and the friar and all the rest of that could be a way to populate it with some still surprising choices, even though one would think that they're obvious. Like, for instance, Rebel Wilson is not who you would think of, the amazing comedian to play this incredibly, complicated character of Lady Capulet, who wasn't as explored in the play, but I felt we could really do something with. Even Derek Jacobi, I remember going to him and going, look, I know you've done Shakespeare your whole life. I don't know why you'd want to do this, but gosh, I think you could deliver such an interesting angle in. Mm. And it was precisely our adaptation that excited him, going, but I get to rap in this one. I said, you do. That's why I'm interested. It's another way to attack those. So from an overall casting, and even Jason Isaacs, who I'd worked with before, was like, Jason, you simply must come. I'll be in Italy. This is when you'll come. So that was one thing. But
he's crushing it in White Lotus this year. Not to
my God, he's crushing it in everything.
Harry Potter and all that. But like he's that having him in your movie now, off the heels of White Lotus, is even more timely.
Accidental. Other than knowing just the most wonderful human being and a thrill to work with as a director. So yes, fabulous that he's having this other moment.
So great. I would even throw out he came on this show a couple years ago with Ann Dowd when they did it was like a school.
Oh God, Mass.
Oh, everybody check out Mass. He's got range, man. He's got range. But who is he in this?
He plays Romeo's dad, Lord Montague. Very consequential, important character. And we got to expand that. But as it related to Romeo and Juliet, there were two crucial things from the jump. One of them was the age, which is an interesting comment. I've actually heard some people go, oh, but they're 13 or 14 in the play. That may well have been true. However, that was at a time in 1301 where lifespans were 30.
Right. Exactly.
Right. So yes, they may have been married at 14, but that's half of your life.
They were way older proportionately. Yeah.
Proportionally. But even frankly, for 1595, when likely Shakespeare wrote his version, the view of women and age, all that stuff was different as it is in 2025. And as I was developing it, my young daughter would read every draft and look at what I was doing. And she'd go, we don't talk like that. We wouldn't make that choice. But that's who I was making the movie for. I was trying to take Shakespeare's themes and appropriately place them in today's setting. And therefore, I thought, for the one hand, age had to come up a bit. But most importantly, I felt because we're going to be taking this leap of music, I needed the grounding of the journey through these people that audience could feel purchased with, and that it wasn't necessarily a face that they thought they knew before. And so I wanted fresher faces. But when you're trying to cast the two most iconic characters in the world, you can't do that on Zoom. You can't do that just in a pure rehearsal. I flew a whole bunch of people out to Italy to do screen tests, because until you saw Romeo and Juliet together and knew that chemistry and that love story could be there, you got nothing. And ultimately, with everything that we've done, watching Jamie Ward and Clara Rugaard sit there and do these scenes together, I just sat behind the monitors going, thank goodness I found them.
Oh, I'm so excited for everybody to see it. And you've said take the leap of music. So yeah, let's do a deeper dive as promised
Yeah,
into your brother Evan Kid Bogart. Yeah, the soundtrack. And you said you wrote it
absolutely.
with who? Who was the co-writer?
So he had a writing partner named Justin Gray, who also
Okay.
produced the songs with him. And then there's a bunch of other songwriters that we would bring into the process, because when you write pop music, you do, first of all, the funny thing about pop music, as a writer of film and television, I'll
Yeah.
work on a script for literally years. And
Right.
my brother literally will walk into a recording studio 3 hours later, come out and go, oh, we just wrote something called Halo. How do you do that in 3 hours? It's a very different process. However, there's also something that's very true that many people may not know, is that when people are crafting these pop songs, they will often bring in individual other writers that just have a little secret sauce that they think applies to that particular song or that particular artist. So
Mm.
because we're crafting pop music, different songs had different emotions, different songs had different needs, and we literally had different songwriting groups that we would bring in for each particular song. My brother and his partner Justin would oversee it all with me, but then we would bring in some specific people for each one. And that writing process was no different than they would do on any normal pop songwriting. The difference is it didn't end after 3 hours. It went on for
Right.
10 years. We
Wow.
were literally just kept reworking those songs, reworking the why. And then that was just the writing. The actual crafting of the production, how we did a live capture on set, how we did post-production creation. The music is nothing short of breathtaking. True data point. The movie's 2 hours and 1 minute long, and there's 1 hour and 55 minutes of music between score and songs that are one and the same to some degree.
Oh, that's so great. And you keep mentioning the pop music. Not
Yeah,
only the Halo, we've mentioned the Beyonce song, but
yeah.
also he's written for Britney Spears and J Lo and Brandy and Demi Lovato,
Lizzo
like
and I mean,
all
everybody.
of the greats.
Yeah.
Is it true he also tangent real quick, then back to the movie? Is it true your brother also helped discover Eminem at like the '97 Rap Olympics?
That is 100% true story. And I know it's got nothing to do with our movie, but I'm gonna give you 30 seconds. So my brother's a tiny, tiny young intern working for Jimmy Iovine at the time.
Yeah.
And he was sort of, on his own, kind of searching wherever he could find, and sees this young kid named
Yeah.
Eminem.
Yeah.
Things unbelievable. Comes back, tries to get Jimmy Iovine at Interscope, and everyone nobody cares. Nobody wants to listen to it. My brother breaks into Jimmy's car, puts the demo tape in Jimmy's radio, turns the volume all the way up. So when Jimmy Iovine got in the car, it blasted, and
Whoa.
Eminem history is as a result of that. Absolutely, my brother discovered him.
That is so great. That's awesome. So that cassette tape playing in the car for him directly preceded what like the I don't know if it was an HBO document. The thing the clip we've all seen on YouTube
Oh yeah,
of
yeah.
Iovine with and Dr. Dre hearing, "Hi, my name is," and going what, like that's a famous clip. But your
No,
brother
that's
set
absolutely
that up.
correct.
Well, and end tangent, but it
Good tangent.
it directs back in because we're talking about the pop music of the time and rap
Yeah.
and pop. Like this is the type of music that you're bringing to the story of Romeo and Juliet in Juliet and Romeo. So, what are some of the song titles? Give us tease some of your favorites.
Oh my gosh. Well, one of my favorites, which will actually coming out on April 25th in 2 days from Lakeshore Records, is called "The Mask I Wear." One of the things that we do often in the film, which is different, I think, than many, is it's not just here's four people singing together, in a scene.
Yeah.
Because it's so much inner voice, we have all these characters in their own worlds in different locations singing solos that are part of an ensemble. Mask I Wear is perhaps one of the most important ones, where it really speaks to, frankly, women at that time and the different roles that were foisted upon them that they were expected to follow. And obviously Juliet is expected to follow a certain course, but so is Lady Capulet, who probably lived that same experience. So is the character of Rosaline. So is the character of Veronica, played by Martina Ortiz-Luis, that I created for the role. So the song "Mask I Wear" is just a beautiful introspective look at the roles women were challenged with, and ultimately, therefore, what the challenges were for this movie. So that is absolutely spectacular that the guys wrote. Another beautiful song called "Beat the Same" is really our anthem of the love story between Romeo and Juliet, which appears early in the film. That's another fun release that we'll be doing on May 2nd. But truly, there's 15 original songs in the piece, which is an enormous amount. And every one of them lives in its own space and delivers its own thing. And yet somehow is all part of one tapestry. Again, just kudos to those guys. I don't know that there's quite been something done as expertly musically as the two of them have done.
Yeah, I mean, we here in the DC area, that's where I'm talking from in Maryland. We're here for it because we love musical interpretations of Romeo and Juliet because West Side Story began at the National Theater in DC. You know, Cheetah Rivera, the whole thing before going to Broadway,
Yep.
and then of course the movie. But that
Yep.
reminds me, do you have a favorite film version of this tale? Is it the aforementioned 61 West Side Story or the 2021 Spielberg, or is it like the Baz Luhrmann, Leo DiCaprio, Claire Danes, or I don't know, or any I have not mentioned? Do you have a favorite stage or screen version prior to yours?
I do, and while it's a huge adaptation, I do think it is the original West Side Story
Yeah,
adaptation because it was, well, it obviously leapt saying we're not Romeo and Juliet anymore.
yeah.
Everybody who went knew that it was,
We're not Montagues and Capulets, we're sharks and
but
jets.
we're the Jets and the
Yeah,
Sharks.
yeah,
So we knew.
yeah, yeah.
I just thought the approach that Sondheim, Lawrence, all of them did
Mm,
was so brilliant in capturing the same themes, the
yeah.
same impact, the same youth culture desire to define their own world. I don't think anybody's honestly captured it as well as certainly the stage show, which
Yeah.
I didn't obviously see the original, but I saw future versions. But seeing the original movie, I just don't know that there's much that competes. Ultimately, while something like Baz's piece is so fabulous,
Right.
not really what I wanted to do. It's such a jarring kind of
Yeah.
wake up and we're changing everything.
It's
That's
postmodern. We're about to do Moulin Rouge. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
there's no horses, there's car. It just
Right,
was
right,
such
right,
a
right.
different leap, which was fascinating.
Sure.
It just wasn't what I wanted to do. But by the way, also iambic pentameter. So
Mm,
even as cool as it was, still distancing, I think, for
right.
some. And my goal here is to be the opposite of distancing, to embrace and
Yeah.
engage people so that they get these themes.
Wow. And true testament to what you're saying. No joke, folks. I literally got goosebumps when you were talking about the Sondheim songs. They're some of the greatest show tunes ever written, and I got
Ever,
goosebumps just
ever.
thinking about them, let alone hearing them.
Well,
Uh,
but you know what's interesting? Of all, and I was actually thinking about this last night, of maybe not all, but most musical stuff, you don't have something as fabulously dynamic and individually specific as Tonight from West
right.
Side Story. When you
Mm,
get to all these characters and all their things, I think when you look at what we've done with Juliet and Romeo, that's probably the closest thing we've tried to emulate, where we have moments like that, something like Streets on Fire, where there's
yeah.
characters all over the place
You mean like
dealing
the
with.
reprise where it's like the ensemble right before the Rumble
Yep,
when
yep.
Tonight comes back and there's
The
all the
Sharks are going to
characters.
have their day. The Jets
Yeah,
are going to have their
they're
day. And
counting on it
tonight,
to be there tonight. All
and then
that. Yeah, yeah,
Maria, right?
yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
everything's in there, which is just fantastic. And
Goosebumps
but
again.
we tried that. Yeah, I have it all the time.
But your version, you're saying that's the closest. If we're trying to tease people to go to the theater and see this, that's
Yes.
that scene with the right before the Rumble when they're doing Tonight on the ensemble in the round or whatever. That is the closest sort of style
And
to
in
what
terms of
you were.
musicality, look, I
Yeah,
think there's no question for people that saw, something like Greatest Showman, we live in that space. I think what they did was brilliant there. And I think that we live very
yeah,
much in that space. So if you saw Greatest Showman, I think you'll, by the way, I think if you saw La La Land, I think if you saw Wicked,
yeah,
there's elements of all those things. But when you talk about the musicality,
yeah.
boy, do I think the original West Side Story just did some things that were just
Yep.
never rivaled.
Yep. And it's funny that you mentioned those Pasek and Paul. You mentioned La La
Yeah.
Land and Greatest Showman because Dear Evan Hansen also started here in DC at
And Darren
Arena
Hanson as well. I mean,
Stage
what
before
Pastor
going.
and Paul have always done, I
Yeah.
think, is not at all dissimilar to the
Yeah.
musicality in terms
Yeah.
of our approach. From a filmmaking standpoint, we've tried to do something a little bit different.
Yeah.
But musically, boy, those guys are spectacular.
Man, I would love to see. I don't know if it's ever happened, but I would love to just sit in a room with Pascal and Paul and Evan and Timothy, the Bogarts and the.
Be a fascinating.
Man,
It'd
that'd
be a
be
great conversation. Yeah. But by the way, Lynn and everything that he's done in
yeah,
Hamilton, and and by the way, Tick Tick Boom, which was I just thought breathtaking.
yeah,
In terms of again making it feel real and yet musical. It's just
yeah.
fascinating.
And I believe in the movie version of that, when we had Andrew Garfield on talking about that, I
Yeah,
believe Sondheim, one of his final things was him calling into the answering machine in that movie.
that's correct.
I believe.
No,
Yeah,
I don't know if that's urban legend because I've heard that same story that that's really him on the
yeah,
voice. And boy, is that
yeah,
boy, if you're in the musical world and you get to have Mr. Sondheim before, while he was still with us, leave a message and
yeah,
you're done. You can check
yeah,
check your box.
exactly. Like in Rent, speak except for it's Sondheim. uh,
Amazing. Yeah.
We've mentioned so many legends, Shakespeare, Sondheim, but I have to mention that your own dad. Our listeners will geek out on this. Your dad was the
Yeah,
Neil Bogart that founded
he was.
Casablanca Records, and I always found, and then that so that come out it came out in like the 70s. That happened, but I always found it
Correct.
fascinating that your dad was born in February 1943, literally right as Casablanca had just come in theaters, right shortly before that.
Correct.
And of course, and we have to say your dad was Neil was no relation to Humphrey Bogart. But
No,
was it one of his favorite movies? It had to have been if he adopted the Bogart connection and was like, I'm gonna name my record label after. It had to be one of his favorites.
it was interestingly, it was a multi-step process, which isn't as clean as one would think. His original name was not Bogart, first of
Ah,
all. So it was my mother who and she was like, we gotta fix his name. And
what
so
was
they
his name? What was his name?
Bocats with a Z.
Ah, okay, okay.
And she's like, that doesn't work at all. And so my mother and ultimately drove my father to change it to Bogart. That came years before, because then he did Buddha Records, where he discovered Gladys Knight and
Yeah,
Curtis Mayfield and Parliament, amazing stuff.
yeah.
And then when it was time for Casablanca, they're like, they actually were thinking of Emerald City, but they couldn't get the rights for Emerald City for the name of the record. And my
Ah,
mother again was like, Bogart, yeah, what about?
yeah.
And hence the draw to Casablanca. It didn't tie directly to the 1943 birth, which is interesting also.
Have you
But it,
considered that? I mean, you had to have. That's not an original idea for me. You've had to have considered that on your own. That
no,
the
it's a
birthday,
weird, it's a
yeah,
weird kind of,
serendipity. Yeah.
serendipity for sure. Yeah.
Are you a fan of Casablanca the movie? Because I was just talking to TCM host Ben Mankiewicz about this the other day, and just where the world is, it's very time like Bogart's character in that movie symbolizes America's reluctance to get into World War II. He's always Rick Blaine's like,
Oh
I'm
my gosh.
not going to stick my neck out for anybody, and then of course joins the resistance during that famous
Yes.
battle of the national anthem, the La Marseillaise scene. But
Yep.
anyway, that's my favorite moment. I tear up when I hear them singing. But do you have a favorite moment?
Gosh, there's so many favorite moments. I just love watching. Suddenly, I know it's the famous line about
Sure.
I'm shocked there's gambling here. Every
Yeah.
one of those characters was so just breathtakingly, brilliantly defined. And
Yeah.
I agree. I don't know that movies today quite live up to the promise of what they did in those days. It's just a breathtaking piece.
It's what were they eating for breakfast? And how many lines?
Truly,
I mean, we'll always have
truly.
Paris, and here's looking at you, kid, and all the gin joints, and play it,
All
Sam.
of them. I mean, there's just
It's
every
ridiculous.
every single line is just a keeper,
Yeah,
right? It's
round
just
up the usual suspect. I mean, there's so many, and then
round
you're
up the. I think probably that's my moment. Round up the usual suspects was just like it was so great.
the gambling. I'm shocked. Your line that you said was great. The one the more you watch it, you find other ones as you get like around the house. My wife always says, "I try," and I always say, "Well, we all try, but you succeed." I think he says that to Victor Laszlo. But there's so many. I came here for the waters. I was misinformed. There's so many good ones. All right. Well, we've thoroughly tangented on Eminem and now Casablanca,
It's
but
good stuff.
it ties in. Well, it was all because I was talking about your dad. So he
Yes.
Casablanca Records in '73, right? You listed some of the other ones on his other efforts, but remind us, Kiss, Donna Summer, he launched some
Yeah.
legends.
So before that, all the way back to Chubby Checkers, but the big ones at Buddha Records were Gladys Knight,
Yeah.
or Curtis Mayfield, he did "It's Your Thing," right, with the Isleys. I mean, just one amazing hit after another. And then he launches Casablanca and Donna Summer, Kiss, The Village People, brings Parliament back again, and really defines music almost for a decade. I mean, just extraordinary, but also not just music. Defines the experience of experiencing music, which I think ultimately is what separated Casablanca. It wasn't just listen, it was go and be part of. That was the birth of Kiss Army, like all that become part of it, which as a young kid going to those offices every day after school, I was so immersed in be part of something experiential. That's never left me.
As a kid growing up, which of those bands were your favorites? Were you like a Kiss fan as a kid, or?
I was a fan of all of it ultimately because it was just all around me. The thing that, of course, is interesting, as one would imagine, is growing up in it, it wasn't the people with makeup, right? Like those were my uncles, right? And Donna was my aunt, and like these were people that were at our house all the time. I always felt very funny. Another tangent story, but when I was about 10, I was actually living in Boston with my mother because they were separated at the time, and my mother, I think, intentionally made me take up violin to sort of piss off my dad. And I went to California with my violin, and I went to the Casablanca office with my violin. I remember my dad going, "What is that?" And about 20 minutes later, Gene Simmons walked in. So let me see that. Took my violin and shattered it.
What?
And then he handed me a 1978 bronze top Gibson Les Paul Deluxe, which I still play to this day. And I was like, "You're gonna play rock and roll, kid." That was my childhood. I mean, it doesn't get any more fun and crazy and unsuspecting than that.
Gene Simmons smashing your violin and giving you a guitar instead.
Pretty amazing.
You got to play
Pretty
rock
amazing.
and roll.
Yeah.
Wow. But I want to know how you then shift sort of a couple degrees and become a filmmaker. So I guess your dad, he died pretty young, right? Aged
Very
like
young. He was only
39
39 in 1982.
How old were you at that point, if you don't mind me asking?
12.
Damn, well, I don't want to, sorry, I don't want to bring up like bad memories, but
No, it's long enough. I've dealt with.
how do you, well, yeah, well, and you're probably going to continue throughout your work in subconscious ways you don't even know.
For sure.
So like,
No, but that's very true. That's in everything. You're absolutely correct.
That's the artist's soul.
Absolutely true.
So how do you do that shift? I mean, so you could have easily run a record label or something, but like, how do you shift?
And you're absolutely right. And people always expect that it is ultimately what my younger brother Evan did, and even what my younger brother Brad, who actually produced with us, Juliet and Romeo, and has produced a number of things with me, but also was very heavy in the music space. Sure. For whatever reason, I know what, and maybe not for whatever reason, you just brought it up, right? So because my father died, when I was 12. It was this year he passed away. I wrote my first screenplay. Now, it was terrible. Of course, I was 12, but it was 110 pages, if I recall. And it said fade out. So for whatever reason, I started finding a solace or maybe an escape in the creation of those worlds. I was already, my dad had given me an 8mm camera, had already been shooting these little silly 8mm films. You know, Star Wars had come out. I don't know if you remember back in the day, there were these silly Advent TVs instead of big screen TVs. So I took these Advent TVs, took, black construction paper, punched holes in them, put them up so it would look like stars twinkling. Took my Star Wars, toys, put them on strings, and then I'd shoot my brother and I in cars as if we're in the cockpit. So I was already at like 10, 11, 12, 14. I was already playing with filmmaking and taking film and scratching, laser shots and kind of what you could do with it. So for whatever reason, that part of the alchemy of creation, I was just unbelievably interested in at a very early age, and it just kept me in that path.
I love it. And it's funny when you said your first script stunk. Don't worry, but
it did. Yeah. Look, that movie I just told you, it was a combination of Terminator and Back to the Future before either were made. Yeah. They were both. Mine was terrible, and those were great.
Exactly. We all have these ideas firing, right? But anyway, so all right, so then remind our listeners some of the other projects that you did leading up to this one. I have them I can ask about. How about?
The one before this was actually the story of my dad, where I finally did tell that story, which was an interesting thing. As a kid who sort of felt an obligation almost to the memory of my dad, to the family, like literally every day for decades. When are you making the movie? So the fact that I was finally able to make it was extraordinary. I always knew, ultimately people would be like, the son shouldn't make the story of the father. They're whitewashing it. And I would ultimately argue, I didn't. You should check it out. I didn't whitewash anything about him. I hope he's okay. But so I really thoroughly enjoyed that.
Spinning Gold is the 2023 biopic. And it was originally going to be Timberlake, right? But then Jeremy Jordan.
For years we tried to do that. And then I had Jeremy, who was just spectacular.
What was like directing? I mean, every Broadway fans know and love Jeremy Jordan. But is there ever moments where you're like watching the Video Village, watching the monitor, and you're like, wait a minute, that's my dad?
Jeremy did such a brilliant job in coming up with the physicalization by watching so much footage of my father. Sometimes I would absolutely be watching that, and other family members would be with me watching it, and it would be a little chilly. It would be like, that's weird. That's another moment when there were scenes between my father's character and my mother's character, and my people from the family were going, okay, that's something. So definitely unique, and Jeremy was breathtaking, but so was Jay Fair. Everybody, Derulo, was Khalifa. It was a really wonderful fun. And on that one, I had Taylor Parks and Lettucey, who are also both incredible music artists, both in Juliet and Romeo. Prior to that, I did a movie called Last Full Measure. I didn't direct that. I produced it,
right? Yeah. It
was one of my favorite things producing, because the cast, from Sam Jackson to the great, sad, Chris Plummer and William Hurt and Peter Fonda. I worked with all three of them before they passed.
Wow.
But we had Harris, just literally one phenomenal actor after another, telling
and
a really
Sebastian Stan too, right? Sebastian Stan.
By the way, and Sebastian Stan before he was really everyone
remembers Winter Soldier, but I thought he was great as Jeff Galooly and I, Tonya, and then of course as Donald Trump last year in The Apprentice, like underrated in that. Great performance.
He's amazing.
Yeah. But so you got to work with all these folks, and
Correct.
then so would you say Spinning Gold is the thing you're most proud of leading up to this? After this releases, it's going to be
Yes.
Juliet and Romeo,
No,
right?
well,
But
I think that, look, I think many people would say that no matter what, the latest thing.
of course.
I would say honestly and genuinely, I do believe my career as a creator, especially as a director, has absolutely been additive and has grown. And I think that what I accomplished in Spinning Gold
Yeah.
was unbelievably thrilling for me to be able to do that for the
Mhm.
memory of music and the memory of my father and the memory of my family. That said, it was also a soundstagey kind of movie. I mean, you can't tell when you look at it, but it was a
Yeah.
very kind of controlled kind of piece. I had never suddenly found myself with 400 crew members, with 6 units and with,
Yeah.
all locations in the middle of some foreign country. I mean, the scope and scale of Juliet and Romeo is so gigantic. I mean, for a studio film, forget that it's an independent film, which is extraordinary.
An
That we
independently produced musical must be just a whole challenge, but a welcome
crazy.
one, of course. Yeah.
But a welcome one, challenging as hell, but a welcome one. So yes, I mean certainly to date it would have been the last film, but I really do believe the tools I used on this one, and ultimately the vision I was able to play with and hopefully achieve, was just another level on this film.
Well, I know I'm really gonna, as I tee this up, it's really gonna be promoting Juliet and Romeo, but I want to give you a chance if you want, to tease anything else you got. Don't you have like a Robin Hood thing coming up too?
This idea of the greatest love stories that set to the greatest music that
Yeah.
you're about to, has been kind of a franchise idea. Now there are 2 other films in the Juliet and Romeo story, because I take that story to some really interesting places during the years from 1301 to 1303, where we sort of left the medieval times into the Renaissance, a battle between church and state with this crazy Pope
Wow.
Boniface. There's a lot of story going on
So
in that
you're
film.
imagining a couple sequels, is what you're saying,
There
or
are 2 more
spin-offs?
films. There are 2 more direct films in the story that take a lot of
Wow.
these characters that some other characters we haven't met yet, like Dante Alighieri, who comes in, all
Ah.
these real life characters that occurred during that time
But it
that
can't be
work not so
Mercutio,
much.
right? Because he's whacked.
Mercutio, as stories tell, there's some
Yeah.
consequential events that
Yes.
happen with them as well. Although, you look at some of other Shakespeare things, there have been some interesting things done with characters that are here and there.
I want to see the
So,
Apothecary spin-off.
by the way, the Apothecary with Dan,
Yeah.
that whole storyline was actually, I wish I could say I came up with it. It was Dan Fogler who came up with it after I cast him. We were
Yeah.
really kind of playing with different ideas for that character. But to your point, it doesn't need to be a spin-off. There's a lot of interesting story left to tell. So
Yeah.
ultimately, those are the next 2 films that I plan to make.
Okay, okay, cool. So you're viewing this almost as like a little
It's a
universe, a little
franchise
franchise. I love
for
it. Well,
sure.
and you would be foolish not to try. Why everybody, if you get a franchise, man, there's so much meat on the bone here, I think.
Yep.
And but then in addition to that, there's also a Robin Hood one, maybe, and maybe some
There,
other
there,
great
there is,
love
and
stories.
some other fabulous historical characters that, if you look at, I mean, ultimately, what the great journey of Julian and Romeo was understanding first and foremost, which was a surprise even for someone who had directed the play so many times,
Yeah.
that Shakespeare didn't come up with one idea. They're all taken from not just one piece of source material, but about 7 other stories from Italian authors, UK
Right.
poets, French authors, all of which then went back to historical documents from the church, going back to 1301. So Shakespeare based all of his play on a whole bunch of source material, which therefore had so many other things that he just couldn't fit in his iteration.
Right.
As I've gone back through history to some of these great, great characters and great, great stories, the same is true. When you go to the origins of them all, there's a lot to tell, and that's really where I'm looking to play.
I love it. Well, you've been generous with your time. I would love to know a little more about some of your like filmmaking inspirations. Because we've talked a lot about musical theater and Sondheim and
Yep.
all of that, as well as your dad in the record industry and all of that. Like obviously you have those huge simultaneous parallel inspirations. But in terms of like filmmaking, once you really started to get into it, have you seen sort of like your favorite films or filmmakers change over the years? Like when you were younger, I'm sure, like what were some of like just the pop culture blockbusters you loved? I mean, you mentioned Back to the Future and
I
Terminator.
mean, my goodness. I mean, I remember happening into, I didn't know, but it was a day before internet and all that stuff. So I just
Yeah,
happened into a screening of Back to the Future. And I was like, what did
yeah,
I just experience? Which was the same when I saw Raiders of the Lost Ark. I was like,
yeah,
how is that happening in front
yeah.
of me? I mean, these were
Totally.
transformational pieces. Star Wars. I mean, these were
Yeah,
transformational events. But I will tell you, the most inspiring piece of material, and it's a crazy story. I'll make it brief, but was Bob Fosse's All That Jazz, which may be an interesting reference. And
it's showtime, folks.
Oh my gosh, man. I was at NYU and I was living on 13th Street between 5th and 6th. I remember looking out my window and there's an art house theater called the Quad Cinema, and it was playing a movie called All That Jazz. And the only thing I knew, for whatever reason, I mean, it was 15, 16, I was 17. I was young when I college. I was 17 going on 18. I just had never studied Fosse. I don't know why, but I just hadn't. What I knew is my father had actually released the soundtrack to All That Jazz, but I just thought, oh, that Broadway movie. I didn't know anything about it. So I decided, yeah, what the heck? I go in at 10 a.m. to watch the movie. And I'm maybe the only guy in the theater. I sat there with my mouth open in pure awe of what that filmmaker did with the tools of editing, sound, voice, dialogue. I swear to God, I stayed for all 5 showings. I never left the theater. I just watched it all day long. And then, to make it worse, I went to NYU and took out a CP 16 millimeter camera, convinced my buddy who was a projectionist, I hope I don't get in trouble for this, to film the film. So I then
you were a bootlegger.
I literally back in the day
you were Jerry Seinfeld and Kramer.
I was. You couldn't really bootleg back in the day. There was no internet, but I had a Steenbeck editing machine in my apartment, and so for the entire year of school that year, I had the print of All That Jazz, and I studied it frame by frame to try to understand, why is that shot for 4 frames? Why did he do that there? It was the greatest learning experience of my life. And yes, the opening line of All That Jazz, "To Be on the Wire is life, everything else is waiting," is literally like, yes, I live that every day.
And the way it builds to the "Goodbye, my life, goodbye" ending.
Oh my gosh!
Zipping up
Talk
in
about
a body
chills.
bag.
Talk about chills. That last sequence. Oh my gosh!
We could literally do a whole podcast raving about All That Jazz, because it's one of my favorite. It's one of my favorite movies ever. And yes, I love blockbusters like Back to the Future, like you, all that stuff. Sure, but in terms of like movies that just open your eyes to a new way of artistic filmmaking. Like I know Kramer vs. Kramer won that year, but Apocalypse Now could have won that year. But All That Jazz easily could have.
I don't know that there's anything like it. I really don't. I don't think there's anything quite like it.
One of the great showbiz movies ever.
Absolutely.
I mean, and about like an artist. I guess there's like Fellini's 8.5.
Yeah.
But All That Jazz might be the best of that type.
I do think it's the best. But I think what you just pointed to, it's so uniquely self-aware, and Fellini certainly did that in 8.5. Yes, I agree with you, but I don't know that anyone that I can recall did anything. This is the story of me. I'm going to reveal all of my failings, and I'm literally going to live the life I'm saying. Whatever you do, don't live this life. And he ends up dying the way he projected to die. I mean, I don't know that anyone's ever done anything like that before. It was just a breathtaking work.
And died in Washington, D.C.
On the street corner. I mean, just unbelievable.
Exactly. Thank you so much. Again, Timothy Scott Bogart, writer-director of Juliet and Romeo. It's going to be movie theaters on Friday, May 9th. You don't want to miss it. Thank you so much. I could talk these old movies and shows for all day.
Thanks so much for listening to Beyond the Fame with Jason Fraley. Our theme music is Scott Buckley's Clarion. Remember to give us a 5-star rating if you like what you hear. We'll see you next time.